Good morning. It's good to see everyone. So I'd like to start first certainly with a message to our students, to our families, and our staff. We care about you. We are also confident that you are going to be incredibly successful with online learning. We are here for you and we want to keep you both safe and healthy. We can do that while fortifying the learning in the Rochester City School District. This is our time to be successful with remote learning. The past several weeks have been gut-wrenching for superintendents locally, across New York State, and the nation. We have worked with numerous stakeholders, including boards of education, teachers, parents, health departments, elected leaders, community members, etc., to finalize decisions relative to how school will indeed open in the fall. On July 31st, the Rochester City School District submitted its reopening plan to the New York State Education Department, which included a hybrid plan for pre-K4 and specialized services, as well as a remote plan for students in grades 5 through 12. Since that time, we have been deliberating relative to the best way to ensure that all our students receive access to high-quality instruction in the safest way possible. We have been listening intently to feedback from parents, teachers, staff, and community members who have expressed concern over the continued spread of COVID-19. However, as recommendations and circumstances changed in the last few weeks, it was important for me to look at all the facts as we rapidly move towards the reopening of schools. I have to be very frank, this was not an easy decision to make. As you know, we have decided that all Rochester City School District students will begin the school year in September under a remote learning model and not the hybrid model that was originally proposed. So just so we're clear, the new aspect of our reopening plan is that pre-K4 and specialized services will be remote as well. I just want to reiterate, the new aspect of our plan is that pre-K through 4 as well as specialized services will be remote as well. This will occur the first 10 weeks of school with regular assessment of our progress towards eventual reopening. We carefully considered the governor's expectations around testing and contact tracing, particularly the additional planning with the health department that will be needed. We also reviewed the input we received from the Rochester community and took great consideration of the experiences of other large urban districts around the country. We are the only large urban district in Monroe County. As I've said in the past, the Rochester City School District is unique. The size of our district alone is one of the contributing factors in making this decision. I have to consider and be responsible for the health and safety of over 25,000 students. This is a good decision for the Rochester City School District, its students, families, and staff. We have the ability to make the appropriate technology available to all of our students. Every student will have access to a laptop, a MiFi device, and the tools they need to learn. And we have worked to make available support services and instructional supports to ensure success for our students with the goal of making remote learning stronger. We need all staff focused on instruction, which simply cannot be the case if our staff are preoccupied with taking temperatures, sanitation, keeping students appropriately distanced, and contact tracing if there are positive cases. Our students deserve all of our educators' support and staff focused on the students' educational needs. My concern, frankly, is that if we open for in-person instruction and then shortly afterwards we have to pivot back to providing online instruction, that quick pivot to online instruction will be difficult for everyone. I would like to avoid making another likely pivot and focus right at the beginning of the school year on a solid instructional plan. Our students will have our full attention with online learning, and it is just a change of venue to an online classroom. Instead, we are focusing on student success. We have spent time during the summer and the spring and summer, and will continue on making our online education even more robust with continuous evaluation and assessment. There are many opinions as well as mixed emotions on how we should proceed as a school district, and that is understandable. I have taken those factors into consideration and have concluded that at this time, this is the best course of action for the Rochester City School District. Students are our first priority and drive the decisions that I make. In addition, I have a great responsibility for the safety of our teachers and staff. All voices have been heard, and while I know that this may be an unpopular decision for some, I am focused on the whole. The final decision does rest with me, and I have reflected on the impact of this decision more than I believe anyone else in our school district. These are the things that certainly keep me up at night. The magic number is 2:37 a.m. in the morning when I wake up. When I envision bringing students back out of their homes, and this is such an exciting time for me as a superintendent. As you know, every year I greet students by riding the bus to school with them. So I was looking forward to doing that here in Rochester. We bring students back onto the buses and into school buildings this fall and winter. I just simply could not guarantee that another outbreak might occur in our community. Right now, I unequivocally believe that online instruction is the smartest decision whereby this district can provide education and ensure the health and safety of our students, their families, extended families, and of course, our faculty and staff. The only decision that I feel allows us to ensure the health of our students, staff, and our community at large is to keep our students learning from home and to focus our resources on instruction and accountability for learning and growth. A high-quality education is simply non-negotiable. Schools must, and I underscore must, provide meaningful instruction during this pandemic, whether they are physically open or not. We have put measures in place to hold ourselves accountable to the principle that learning is the focus. I would like to briefly review the supports we already have in place for our scholars as we continue our online education programming. First, synchronous and asynchronous learning. And just to make sure we're clear, synchronous learning is online or distance education that happens in real time, whereas asynchronous learning occurs through online channels, or other vehicles without real-time interaction by the educator. Each day, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday will start with a social emotional check by the teacher. This is pre-K through 12th grade. These interactions will be between 15 and 20 minutes. School counselors, school social workers, school psychologists will continue to provide emotional support to students relative to their specific remote learning needs. They will also continue to provide support to parents and caregivers who need assistance. Targeted professional development for teachers and staff will occur that will address individual technology and remote learning needs. Administrators will conduct announced virtual walkthroughs of classrooms. This is non-evaluative and does not constitute an informal or formal observation as dictated by the APPR, or Annual Professional Performance Review. We'll have formal processes to follow up with student absences to make sure that we are re-engaging those students back with learning. We are so pleased that there will be 12 recreation centers who will also support our students. While this is not an official daycare, this can help address childcare needs that some of our parents or caregivers indicate are needed. We thank the City of Rochester and Dr. Danielle Lyman-Torres, who has worked with us to make this happen, and she will speak with you briefly in a little more detail than I can. We also will be working directly with the College at Brockport, who has interns, student teachers, etc., who need to be placed. The New York State Department of Education has flexibility relative to the way that their interns and student teachers can operate in a remote environment. Dr. Tom Hernandez, standing to my right, will share how interns can support our teachers, our students, and our families. There are also retired staff who have reached out to me who are willing to support students either via phone or online to support additional needs. And we also will be working on setting up confidential hotlines for youth who are in crisis. For our ELL and bilingual students, Rochester City School District will continue to provide support to our English language learners and all students enrolled in bilingual programming by providing distance learning models consistent with the student's grade level and individual needs as determined by formative and summative assessments. Additionally, ELL classes and support will be provided to the greatest extent possible while prioritizing the health of students and staff. Students will be provided E&L services through online platforms like Teams, Google Meet, and or Zooms. Our staff is working on a plan for administering our language acquisition tests. Special education, which I know is a concern for parents in our community, and I'm sure you as the media. Since April of this year, our professionals have been planning for 100% remote learning for our students with disabilities. President White, Dr. Danielle Lyman-Torres, and Dr. Tom Hernandez will provide additional comments relative to the support of our revised reopening plan, and they will address you in that order. Thank you, and you will now hear from our President of the Board of Education, Van White.
You want this? Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. It is a good morning. Listen, I want to first begin by thanking the superintendent and her team. Leslie, where'd you go that quick? Oh, there she is. I want you to know, Leslie, that the Board of Education understands how difficult of a task this was and how challenging of a decision it was that you had to make. We can say, without equivocation, you have exhibited the type of strong, deliberative, thoughtful leadership that is required in a crisis situation. So on behalf of the board, I want to thank you for that leadership. I also want to thank the parent community, our students. This is a very challenging time that we are all in. and the recognition of their patience and their indulgence as we work through this unprecedented situation is clearly required here. And we sense as a community, as a district community, that we have received that patience and indulgence. Finally, I want to thank the community, and let me begin by thanking Brockport, SUNY Brockport, the city of Rochester. If we are going to get through this, it sounds rather hokey, but if we are going to get through this, the only way we are going to get through this is if we do it together, collectively, collaboratively, and I'll address that towards the end of my remarks. But in looking at what the community has to say, like many of you, I am a child of social media, and this morning I began to look at what the response was thus far to this change in direction. And there was some indication that there was positive results, but I saw something in particular, and I warned Leslie about this. I saw one comment by a PhD who said, this is an example of inequity. Why do suburban students get to have in-class learning and urban students do not? He was sort of playing the race card. And let me explain to him and to all those who have a question about this, why this is appropriate, equitable, and right. As you all know, 65% of the district's population is African American, 20% are Latino. You also, unfortunately, know that the city of Rochester ranks third, let me repeat that, third in the nation in child poverty. These are conditions that directly affect any decision relating to this COVID crisis and how the district responds. Now, you also know, because you are learned folks, that people of color are 4 times more likely to die from the coronavirus than white folks. Let's just be very real and direct about that. We also know that African Americans in one particular survey were 33% more likely to suffer hospitalization as a result of the COVID crisis. Now, the reasons behind this are very clear to me and to anyone else who follows the science. Among those highest at risk of getting COVID are patients with serious healthcare problems, such as hypertension. I have hypertension, diabetes, and heart disease. As you all know, African Americans, 40% of us, have high blood pressure. That's among the highest rates in the world. By comparison, only a third of white folks, white Americans, have high blood pressure. Similarly, African Americans suffer from diabetes at a higher rate than Caucasians. Additionally, according to a 2019 survey from the U.S. Department of Labor, 30% of African Americans work in the education field and the health services industry field. 10% work in retail. Now, why is this important? These are the kinds of fields where people generally come in contact with other people, as compared to professional and business services, which can often and quite regularly rely on telecommunication services. So the need for contact is not as frequent. Accordingly, because of the jobs that people of color hold, exposure rates are higher for people in the ethnic and racial communities. Moreover, according to a 2016 Pew Research report, about 34% of African Americans, listen to this, 34% of African Americans use public transportation, as compared to Caucasians, only 14%. You can see why more of us are dying and being hospitalized by the coronavirus. And more of us, let's repeat this, 65% of African Americans and 20% of Latinos attend this district. That's why this superintendent and her team had to be cognizant of how this district is different than the gentleman whose email I read this morning. Finally, census data from 2020 shows us that 44% of African Americans own their own home. That's compared to 74% of Caucasians that own their own home. That means that many urban dwellers, particularly people of color, live in settings where they are exposed to other people. Now, why would I say this to that professor? I'm saying that to him because our children who go to our schools are more likely to go home and be in environments where they're exposing themselves to auntie and grandma and uncle, and we have to be cognizant of that. Our president is frequently saying, the children, they'll survive it. Perhaps that is so, and perhaps the science indicates that they are less vulnerable than adults. But for him to say they are immune is scientifically incorrect. They are carriers of the virus, and they can pass it on to adults. And those adults are people that we are charged as public officials to be concerned about. Those people are teachers, they're cafeteria ladies, they're mothers and their fathers. They're the people that communicate to the rest of our city what is going on. We have to be. Our superintendent had to be cognizant of those lives as well. One professor from the U of R said, how can you possibly get on an elevator and not be cognizant of the fact that you're in a tight space with people? You get the analogy. And here it is. Whether we go up or down in this fight against the coronavirus will depend upon how we communicate with each other. Whether we go up or down in this fight against COVID will depend on how much time we give to collaborate with each other. Whether we go up or down in our fight against this deadly virus will depend on how frequently we communicate, collaborate, and coordinate with each other. That is the reason why our superintendent made the sound, right, and just decision. God bless.
Good morning. Thank you, President White. Thank you, Dr. Myers-Small. I'm Danielle Lyman-Torres, and I am the Commissioner of Recreation and Youth Services for the City of Rochester. And the City of Rochester is steadfast in its commitment to children and families and into ensuring access to nutrition and safe, quality places to play and learn. Our centers are open, our community centers that are open to all city residents and based in neighborhoods to be within walking distance for many. We are proud to partner with RCSD to utilize the tremendous assets of the R centers to ensure that our city's youth, especially those in grades K through 6, have access to support, nutrition, and a safe place to play. RCSD and the City of Rochester will be hosting Learning Lab times at 9 of the R centers that Dr. Myers-Small alluded to earlier during this remote learning period. These learning labs will be for students grades K through 6 and will occur in 2 morning sessions, either 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. or 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. During these sessions, students can access breakfast. They can access personnel, RCSD personnel, who can assist them with navigating, learning, assignments, or other activities. These labs will be held at Adams Street, Avenue D, Carter Street, the Tyshawn Caldwell Center on Campbell Street, the Edgerton R Center, the Frederick Douglass R Center on South Avenue, the David Gant Center, Trenton and Pamela Jackson Center on North Clinton, and the Thomas Ryan Center on Webster Avenue. The City of Rochester will also continue its commitment to be a safe place to play. Our centers will operate activities in the afternoons and serve lunch and dinner for students. Throughout this pandemic response and the reopening, the R centers have safely launched open recreation, swimming, and summer camps. We will continue our rigorous adherence to CDC and health official guidelines for social distancing, PPE, and sanitizing our facilities. Our program plans focus on activities that are lower risk and in alignment with New York State opening guidance for sports and recreation. Our facilities have already been prepared and our staff have been thoroughly trained. All of our facilities require screening prior to entry and face coverings, which we will provide to anyone who does not have one. We have worked as a collaborative partner with RCSD throughout the COVID response, along with other partners such as FoodLink, and we've distributed well over 1 million meals since the beginning of this pandemic. The city is pleased to work with RCSD on this innovative partnership for learning labs and creating a vital asset for children and families who may choose to have support or need support in navigating remote learning and maintaining access to meals and opportunities to play. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Myers-Small, for the opportunity to partner to help make a difference in Rochester's education space. SUNY Brockport and our School of Education, Health and Human Services have a long history of service to our community and in working closely to augment the educational experiences for students and their families in our city. We are pleased and honored to continue our partnership work with the Rochester City School District to help enrich the educational experiences of the students here in Rochester. As part of our collaboration, Brockport's education programs are going to be providing as many as 200 student teachers and interns to assist our Rochester schools as they work with students in the classroom during the fall semester. These student teachers and interns are not only adept at online learning, they will be supervised by teachers in the RCSD and by our expert faculty at SUNY Brockport. Most importantly, our students have a real empathy for the Rochester City School District students and truly embody the notion that we are all in this together. We will also be working to supply the Rochester City School District with social work and school counseling interns to provide the support that RCSD students and families will need as we all negotiate this global pandemic. So let me reiterate, SUNY Brockport is and has always been deeply committed to our Rochester community and is honored to stand with our partners in the City School District to support our community. Thank you.
Before we opened it up for questions, you can see that, again, while not an easy decision to make to shift to remote learning, there were many compelling reasons to do so. And in that shift, in doing so, we have significant supports that will help us be successful to move forward in this regard. So we are very grateful, and I'd like to reiterate my thanks to the City of Rochester and the supports that they've previously provided us, and that we're making some shifts because of remote learning. You heard Dr. Hernandez say that the College of Brockport has had a long-standing relationship of interacting and partnering with the Rochester City School District, and so that partnership will shift a little bit to ensure that our students have what they need so they can be successful, and that learning, although in a remote environment, will continue to happen. So at this point, we'll open up for questions.
In talking to teachers over the past few weeks and months, one of their concerns from the spring remote semester was a lot of students not logging on and trying to get a hold of them, and that possibly not happening. So I'm wondering if you could tell us some things you learned from the spring and maybe how you're going to try to fix that come fall.
So first and foremost, as I shared earlier, we're going to have a social and emotional check-in every morning as a part of the synchronous learning. And so we'll quickly be able to determine who's logging on and who's engaging and who's not. So we have a process in place. We'll have a process in place where if that's not happening, it'll be logged into the system, and then we can have another individual, whether it's a counselor or another staff support to do the follow-up to figure out what's going on relative to the students. So I love the question because it shows that we've been reflective on here's what happened. And again, constantly evolving process. March 13th was the first pivot. We needed to quickly get up to speed. We've monitored, we've adjusted, we've assessed and evaluated, and so that's a part of our new process. And what I failed to say is really in Rochester City School District, this is remote learning 2.0. So it's not going to be what it was previously, because we know there was frustration over that.
What's the hardest part of the decision?
I couldn't hear you.
The hardest part of the decision?
Because in-person instruction certainly is really the most critical way to go. And you know, we've heard from our students, we've heard from our staff and our families that they miss those personalized interactions, that students miss those interactions with one another, that students miss those interactions with their teachers or other adults. But we also know COVID-19 really was I always say a challenge is a flip side of an opportunity. So the challenge presented us opportunities to figure out how we could continue to teach students. And so we feel, while not the perfect or not the optimal way to do this, given the factors that we mentioned earlier, that we felt that this was the right decision to make. But again, not an easy one. And as I shared it definitely keeps me up at night.
Dr. Myers-Small, you made the opposite decision 2 weeks ago. You argued that the risk was low for younger students and that many of those students didn't have access to MiFi's.
Oh, I didn't say that they did not have access. That's not accurate.
That's not accurate?
I did not, no.
Okay.
Because our technology department has been very, very strong, and we have a deployment. So I did not say that they did not have access.
Okay.
No.
Not in the spring, no. You did not say that. Not in the
I wasn't here in the spring.
No. You said, okay, all right. What changed about the risk in 2 weeks? Was there...
I shared that in my comments, but I can certainly reiterate. We've been watching, remember, other school districts have opened earlier than us, and so we've watched that. Districts across the country who are our size or larger or even smaller, and so that was certainly part of it. The governor's remarks around the testing, we wanted to make sure that that had integrity, and that was certainly concerning to me, but it really was just watching, and as I've been sharing, this plan was not a period at the end of the sentence. We knew that there could be modifications or changes.
Is there a chance you'll change your mind again?
Hopefully in 10 weeks we'll be back to hybrid.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So you're expected to go back to hybrid after?
We'll be assessing every few weeks. We'll be meeting with different folks internally and externally. We'll continue to monitor, because remember, the governor does have the ultimate decision-making authority in this. So if our levels of infection continue to rise, then my decision certainly would change, but it would be based on that. But we need to look at how things are going and monitoring and adjusting. We need to continue to assess how the online learning is going. We're confident we're going to be providing professional development. But you know, when the way that you pose that, it makes it sound like changing my mind is a bad thing, or that it's indecisive as a leader. I feel like that's true leadership when you can take a look at the environment and look at what's going on, whether it's the science or current conditions. And I certainly feel that it was important for me to make that decision. So I stand by it.
So is there anything you need to see data-wise to make it okay to go back to hybrid?
Certainly, infection levels, seeing what's happening in other schools, because other schools will be moving in the hybrid model. So we need to see what's going on with those infection rates to help monitor. But again, I think our best benchmark is going to look at other districts who have opened, who are about our size, to see what's happened.
Can you address how much of an obstacle the governor's demands for both rapid testing and contact tracing? How far did you get down that as far as being able to meet those, and how much of an obstacle is that for you to be able to meet those?
You know, I thank you for the question. I think what the obstacle has been is that we've received a certain set of expectations from the governor's office and then the state education department. Like, it seemed like we were trying to serve two masters, if you will, right? And so, but we're a large school district, as I've said, 25,000 plus students. And Mike has done a great job with his staff to adhere to those expectations. But as we just continue to process, and going again to your question, sir, about changing my mind, we really just wanted to take the emphasis off having to worry about PPE, social distancing, etc., and really truly focus on learning. So I think we'll continue to monitor, we'll continue to refine our processes and our strategies so we can thoroughly be prepared and really be ready for when we're able, hopefully in 10 weeks, to go to the hybrid model and then eventually get back to in-person learning.
Do you have that capacity, though, to meet, or is that something we'd have to build the capacity to do?
To meet what?
The testing and contact tracing.
That's what we will be studying over the days and weeks to come. Correct.
The governor also talked about equity. He wanted remote learning and equity to be obvious on workplace. This is a little bit different from what President White talked about, but he didn't define what equity was.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see as equity now that it's completely remote learning for at least 10 weeks?
Mm-hmm.
How do you make sure that that is equitable throughout this district?
So I appreciate that question. So the New York State Equity Family Coalition put out guidelines, and we can send that link to all of you. And they met with parents and had 3 conversations about how do you open schools equitably. And they made the following points. They said, 1, you need to give students schedules that make family life manageable. And our schedules now are just that. 2, they talked about prioritizing student wellness and academics, and we fortified that. And they've also said, prepare for future closures. And so we feel like we're just prepared because we believe that the likelihood of that occurring will be so.
So the
Dr.
equity sounds like it's
talking about 10 weeks from now. Is that sort of the benchmark that's going to be each time? So in 10 weeks, if the numbers you're not comfortable, it'll be 10 weeks from that point, and so on. But that's sort of going to be the benchmark each time. Or are you willing to be flexible? In 10 weeks, you might say, we'll look again in 5 weeks or something like that.
So the 10-week was really how we divide up the way that we grade students and the way that we measure their progress. So it made sense for this first term, if you will, to go 10 weeks. But that's something that we need to discuss with our teams to say, does it mean another 10 weeks, or do we do the halfway point? We need to make sure that we can make that shift of how we are assessing students in the remote environment. How do we do that now back in hybrid, combo, or if students are able to fully be back? Yeah, but right now 10 weeks made the best sense, which is around Veterans Day.
Dr. Myers-Small, I'm curious about the hands-on subjects like art, PE, music. How will those be taught virtually?
So very creatively and innovatively, but our teams have been working on looking at that. There are ways that students, so for art, for example, that the teacher can be instructing and they're doing something at home. So we're really going to try and work to develop some toolkits where kids can still manipulate things. They still can interact with paper or interact with other manipulatives, but you can do band lessons online. It will just be different, and I think what we just have to get accustomed to is that we have been so focused on the fact of the way school has been for many, many, many years. So it's hard for us to even try and reimagine what does it look like online. And what I want to hopefully be able to prove to our school community and others is that remote learning still can have integrity, students still can learn, and they can acquire information and knowledge. But we're just going to have to think differently. So we have to just stop thinking, well, the way that we do band, the way that we do art, the way that we do PE is this way. So it's going to require some creativity. But as educators, that's really our middle name, is being innovative and creative. So I'm excited about that opportunity.
Will grading look like it looked like when it was completely in classroom, or will grading again?
That's going to be shifted, absolutely. So that we'll be able, my hope is to get back to you in another week or week and a half to outline more of these things. I don't want to frustrate you, but people are literally working while I'm out here cajoling you all to put that together. So we're working on that.
Any potential that there might have to be cuts here, paraprofessionals that might be getting cut? Can you clarify anything in that regard?
We're working on that right now as well. The goal really is to try and figure out how can we repurpose staff in this new remote environment. So HR is working fast and furiously around that, and we'll work hard to minimize that. But we know that that is potentially a reality, and that's something that we need to be very transparent and clear about.
As you said, this is a hard decision, and you're never going to be able to please anyone. But
Sure.
I'm curious, what kind of feedback have you gotten from families regarding the students?
That's why it was so hard, because it's been everything from police, open school, 5 days a week. And you know, some of it's frustration too. Some parents are like, I've done this quote unquote teaching thing, I'm good with having my child come back. But others have recognized you know, just the importance for them of it happening, where I have all the way on the other side. Absolutely no, no, no. Please, you need to make sure that you offer me choice, because I do not want to send my child. And then there's variations on that spectrum of what it looks like. And that's why I think it's been so gut-wrenching for superintendents, because we are problem solvers, we work to be collaborative, we want to make sure that we are hearing from the varied stakeholders whom we interact with regularly. But this has been something that it hasn't been really clear-cut. It has been gradations of what people want and need.
For clarity's sake, all students have access to the internet in the Rochester City District?
Yes, they will. They will. Yes, they have. They'll have. Still have almost 8,000 MiFi devices that have not been picked up by students. So now that we're making this shift to pre-K4, Glenn Vanderwater and his team, who have been amazing and incredible, and I know you covered that over at Edison when we were doing deployment. But we'll make sure this time we're going to do it school by school to make it easier. So one, it gets some of that contact back at your home school where you're going, and you can interact with folks there. But they will be available. And I just want to go back to your question just previously. About 60%, you know, today's the deadline for parents to submit their decision on what they wanted to choose. And over 60% of our families said they wanted the remote option. So when we talk about data, that I think is something that's important to note.
Guys, I know that you have to get ready for your noon shots. Let's take 2 more questions, and then we'll go from there. Thank you.
Yeah, Rochester Teachers Association also came out last week pretty strongly for what your ultimate decision was. How much did their input play into your decision?
Sure. So just remember that the teacher union are one of many stakeholders who I listen to. So they certainly were very vocal about what their needs were, but I listened to parents, I listened to students. So there were many stakeholders who indicated what their specific concerns were relative to COVID. So while I've not been able to reply to every email, I have read every email, every tweet, every correspondence, and so many stakeholders indicated what their concerns were.
What will the effect this have on the budget? It's quite, you know, obviously painstaking to come up with the budget. Now that we're remote at least for 10 weeks and not knowing what's going to happen in the future, how does this all play into the district's finances?
So that's something that's still under evaluation, but as I shared when I entered the Rochester City School District, we are continuing to monitor our finances and making sure that we're that we're creating savings, but I don't have that answer. My goal though, and I've been very adamant with my team, is we have to figure out how to creatively redeploy the resources that we have and not have additional stress or burden to our budget.
One more. I apologize if you addressed it, but an influx in daycares or rec centers, are you guys working to make sure you prevent people gathering there as opposed to if they were going to do that in school, that's why you're going remote, to make sure it doesn't happen in those locations?
So daycare certainly is not our district's responsibility, right? We are very cognizant of it. So we are working with the county, we're working with the city, and so while I don't want to pass the buck, I mean, that would be their responsibility to make sure that they're adhering to CDC guidelines and the distancing and all of those pieces.
Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate the time. We'll go from there.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.